Hi, I'm Dr. Jim Ellsworth, and I teach learning assessment and leading the learning organization for the Organization Information and Learning Sciences program, and Intelligence and Policy Analysis, and Intelligence and National Security Ethics for UNM's Global and National Security Policy Institute. Well, that depends on how you count it. I became a member of the UNM family in the beginning of 2020, but of course that was the COVID year. So I didn't actually get out here until the summer of 2021. And I finally joined the UNM faculty myself in the fall of 2022. I actually came to UNM as a faculty spouse. I'm an old retired Army guy, and so when UNM decided they wanted my wife for a tenure line, in theory my job was going to be to support her career for a change. But I'm also a senior scholar in the same discipline, so when her department discovered I was that James Ellsworth, they decided it'd be kind of silly if they only saw me at social events. Well, there's a lot to love about UNM, starting with it being a minority-serving institution. In the Army that I led, we always were a great place to get started for hardworking but economically disadvantaged young people. And that's certainly true of UNM as well. UNM is also a family, which means when things get tough, we help each other to get through and across the finish line. And that's another thing we share in common with the Army. So I really felt right at home. That's an easy one. People tend to think about the online learner as an island of one, marooned out there somewhere with a box of books and a computer. But that computer, leveraged properly, is a gateway to a whole community of learning, where they'll be guided by the same expert human faculty that they would be here on campus, and where they'll have a chance to interact with other learners who bring a richness of professional and cultural perspectives to bear that no instructor and no textbook could possibly bring to the table by themselves. I've always said that online learning is not about the computer network at all. It's about the human networking that makes these things possible. As an instructional design scholar, one of the biggest challenges we talk about is what's called transfer, of what's learned in the classroom to what the learner wants to do with it out in the real world. But when you're teaching online and a bunch of those students and perhaps some of the faculty are actually out there in the real world, that challenge becomes a whole lot easier. And your learners can put in practice what they're learning right as they're learning it. The transfer challenge doesn't go away, but it gets much more straightforward. Well, because I'm an instructional design scholar, I get to teach online education online. So literally everything we do is putting what we're learning into practice. When you get to teach a subject in its authentic context, it really doesn't get more fun than that. Especially because, as my wife's research back during COVID showed, the difference in performance outcomes between institutions that got to leverage the quarter century of evidence-based best practices in online learning that we had at the time, who had made the investments in the infrastructure, who had trained their faculty for it in advance of the pandemic, and those who acted like they were discovering something brand new for the first time, that they had to implement in 2 weeks, were extreme. We simply cannot afford to do this poorly if we want our institutions to survive. Online learning has been the common thread behind pretty much everything I've done in my life. From my doctoral studies in the 1980s, when we were inventing this stuff as mostly listservs on mainframes, to my company command as a young Army captain, infusing the World Wide Web, brand new at the time, for the first time, to my leadership and design of one of the first accredited online master's level, faculty-led, cohort-based online education programs in the country at the U.S. Naval War College, to my authorship of the strategic vision for the U.S. Army's learning ecosystem just a few years ago. I've been right there alongside colleagues like Michael Graham Moore and Richard Mayer, and yes, Stephanie Moore, in identifying and articulating the evidence-based practices for online teaching and learning. For the last 40 years, it's pretty much been my life. I tell my students that my teaching philosophy is basically my command philosophy from the Army. My job isn't to sort the wheat from the chaff, or to hammer them into a nice, neat, bell-shaped grading curve. My job is to get every single one of us safely over the objective, having accomplished the mission at the appointed time. In an online learning environment, that means dealing with every member of my team as an individual human being, with their own goals and challenges, some of which are outside the learning institution entirely outside of my control, but all of which are things I can help them manage by keeping what I do control from rolling downhill on them, while they're trying to accomplish my goals and objectives for our course, for our team together during the semester. When I'm just working at the course level as an instructor, I always start with a discussion board where I ask everybody to introduce themselves and say a little bit about their background, where they're coming from, what their goals are for taking this course, and then ask them to respond to a few of their classmates. And people would be surprised at the common threads that emerge every time that help turn a class full of nervous strangers into a team that's ready to help each other learn the objectives I have for them for my course. And they've never failed to make me proud of the work that they do and how they pull each other through, the feedback they give each other that in some cases teaches their classmates just as much from a different perspective than the one I bring to the table as I possibly could. At the institutional level, other strategies I've used include a student commons or student union or other type of virtual space where they can talk about things that relate to the curriculum but transcend the subject matter of any individual course. Or conferences or symposia on subjects that are related to what we're trying to accomplish in our time together at the university. As a senior operational leader in the fields that I teach, as well as a scholarly one, I have friends and classmates, and increasingly now former students who have gone on to themselves become senior operational leaders in the field. And I can reach out to them to ask them to send the type of tough intellectual problem that they have that really requires somebody to be able to chew on a little, and give that to my students instead of some artificial academic exercise that every class for the last 5 to 10 years has answered and nobody is ever going to care about again. And then they're actually doing something real for a real world client that might actually help somebody. And it gives them something they can put on their resume in a hiring market that's increasingly competitive for people to have done things out in the real world with the skill set that they're marketing for themselves. As a result, more than a few of my students' class projects have made their way into decisions that you've probably heard about in the news. years. And some of my students have actually credited this with their rise into the senior executive ranks. In fact, one of my students just finished up as the serving Assistant Secretary General of NATO. First, understand that online learning is going to place even greater demands on your ability to manage your time, regulate your own learning, initiate communication with your professor when you need a little bit of extra help, write well, and work independently than college already does. And this may be even more of a challenge if you've been out of school for a few years, even if you've been doing some pretty intellectual work. Check out the readiness guide on UNM Online's website, and if any of those things look like they're going to be a challenge to you, consider talking to them about their Learning Strategies program. Second, don't ever forget that you're not in this alone. That computer isn't just your gateway to learning, it's your gateway to a community of learning support, and we're here to help.